In the far reaches of space, where stars burned like scattered diamonds and planets drifted in silence, humanity had carved out a fragile place among the stars. Earth was no longer their only home. Colonies dotted distant moons and barren worlds. But not all colonies were created equal. Some thrived on lush paradises teeming with life. Others, like Verthra, were nightmares wrapped in storms, death lurking behind every shadow. Verthra wasn't just dangerous, it was infamous. A death world. Its surface boiled under acid rains, its jungles hid predators that could swallow a man whole, and its skies crackled with lightning storms so violent they could fry an entire settlement in seconds. Only the toughest survived here, hardened pioneers who didn't flinch at danger because danger was their constant companion. These were the Deathworlders, people who lived by one rule: adapt or die. Captain Cal Draven was one such survivor. Lean and scarred, his dark eyes carried the weight of years spent fighting for survival. He led a small team of Verthran colonists, each as tough as he was. They weren't heroes, they were pragmatists, survivors, fighters. And today, they were about to get dragged into something bigger than themselves. It started with a faint beep from the comm system. The sound cut through the hum of machinery inside their makeshift outpost, a crumbling structure built from salvaged scrap metal and desperation. Mira Solis, the team's biologist, looked up from her notes. "That's weird," she muttered, tilting her head toward the console. "We don't usually pick up signals this deep." Cale stepped closer, wiping grease-streaked hands on his pants. His boots clanged against the metal floor as he moved. "Let me guess," he said dryly. "Another storm knocking out our systems." "No," Mira replied, frowning at the screen. "This is real. It's a distress signal." The room fell silent. Distress signals weren't uncommon in space, but this one came from nearby. An alien vessel crash-landed somewhere on Verthra. That alone was bad news. Few ships dared enter Verthra's atmosphere, let alone attempt a landing. Whoever these aliens were, they were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Before anyone could react, another voice crackled over the comms. This time, it wasn't automated, it was human. "Captain Draven, do you copy?" The speaker sounded desperate, almost frantic. "This is Commander Lyra Voss of the Galactic Rescue Network. We need your help." Cale froze. The GRN, the Galactic Rescue Network, was the galaxy's elite emergency response force. Their ships were state-of-the-art, their crews unmatched. If they needed help, things were worse than they seemed. "Say again," Cale asked, leaning closer to the mic. His tone was sharp, skeptical. "Why are you calling us?" There was a pause before Lyra answered. "Our rescue team went down 12 hours ago. No contact since. We can't risk sending another crew. Not yet. But you know how to survive there. You're already on the ground. Please, Captain. There are civilians aboard that ship. Children." The words hit hard. Civilians. Children. Even Cale, hardened as he was, couldn't ignore that. Still, he hesitated. Helping the GRN wasn't exactly high on his list of priorities. To them, the Deathworlders were expendable, forgotten. Left to rot on Verthra while the rest of the galaxy prospered. Why should they risk their lives now? Behind him, Rin Jax, the group's tech expert, spoke up. "If we don't go, they'll die," he said simply, adjusting the goggles perched on his forehead. "And if we do go," he shrugged, "well, maybe we prove 'em wrong for once." Cale glanced around the room. Mira met his gaze, her expression unreadable but resolute. Tessa Voss, their pilot and former GRN operative, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. She hadn't said a word, but her jaw was tight. Cale knew what she was thinking. Betrayal. Abandonment. The GRN had left her behind once. Maybe this was her chance to settle the score. Finally, Cale sighed, running a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. "Fine," he growled into the mic. We'll do it, but if this goes sideways, don't expect us to clean up your mess." On the other end of the line, Commander Lyra exhaled audibly. "Thank you, Captain. You won't regret this." Kale snorted. Regret wasn't part of the equation. Survival was. As he turned to address his team, he couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would test them in ways they'd never imagined. Whatever awaited them out there, it wouldn't be easy. But then again, nothing ever was on Verthra. The decision to take on the mission didn't mean Kale and his team were ready for it. Far from it. Preparing for a trek into Verthra's hostile wilderness wasn't like packing for a weekend trip. It was more like gearing up for war. Every step outside their outpost carried risks that could end in disaster. And now, with alien lives depending on them, the stakes felt even higher. Kale gathered his team in the main chamber of their crumbling base. The walls groaned under the weight of acid rain pounding against the roof, and the flickering lights cast long shadows across their faces. Each member brought something unique to the table, but none of them were trained rescuers. They were survivors, people who knew how to endure, not save others. "All right," Kale began, pacing back and forth. "Here's what we're dealing with. A crashed alien ship somewhere out there." He jabbed a finger at the holo map floating above the table. It showed jagged terrain, dense jungles, and rivers of toxic sludge. "We've got no idea what condition they're in or what kind of trouble they're facing. But one thing's certain, they won't last long if we don't move fast." Mira Solis leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning the map. She had spent years studying Verthra's ecosystem, cataloging every predator, plant, and peril. Her knowledge might make the difference between life and death. If they're near the crash site, they'll be surrounded by Skoraths, she warned. Those things are relentless hunters. If they smell blood or fear, they'll swarm. Renjak snorted, tinkering with a handheld scanner he cobbled together from spare parts. "Yeah, well, let 'em try. I've been working on some upgrades." He held up a device that looked like a cross between a flamethrower and a taser. Sparks crackled along its edges. "This baby will fry anything dumb enough to come close." Tessa Voss, sitting silently in the corner, finally spoke. Her voice was low but steady. "It's not just the wildlife we need to worry about. The GRN gave us coordinates, but those maps are outdated. Verthra shifts. Rivers change course, cliffs collapse, new predators show up overnight. We'll have to navigate blind for most of the journey." Kale nodded grimly. Trusting the GRN's intel was risky, but they had no choice. Still, hearing Tessa confirm his worst fears only deepened his unease. He glanced at each member of his team, weighing their strengths and weaknesses. Mira was brilliant but lacked combat experience. Rin was resourceful but reckless. Tessa was a wild card. Her past with the GRN made her unpredictable, but her skills as a pilot and fighter were unmatched. "What about the civilians?" Mira asked softly, breaking the tension. "Children," Commander Voss said. "What happens when we find them?" No one answered immediately. The thought hung heavy in the air. Rescuing children meant extra responsibility, extra risk. Could they really protect innocents in a place designed to kill? Kale clenched his fists, his knuckles white. Morality wasn't supposed to factor into their survival mindset. Yet here they were debating whether to put themselves in harm's way for strangers. Finally, Kale straightened, his expression hardening. "We do what we always do," he said firmly. "We adapt. We survive. And if we can bring those kids home without getting ourselves killed, then that's what we'll do." His words settled over the group like a challenge. None of them liked the odds, but none of them backed down either. For all their differences, they shared one trait: resilience. They weren't heroes, and they didn't pretend to be. But maybe, just maybe, they could prove that even survivors could rise to the occasion. As they dispersed to prepare, Kale lingered by the map. His gaze drifted to the red zone marking the crash site. Somewhere out there, frightened aliens clung to life. Saving them wouldn't be easy. It might cost them everything. But as Kale turned away, he reminded himself of one truth. Surviving wasn't just about staying alive. It was about choosing who you wanted to be when the world tried to break you. The journey began at dawn, or what passed for dawn on Verthra. The sky was a bruised shade of orange, streaked with jagged bolts of lightning that lit up the horizon like fractured glass. Acid rain drizzled down in sticky droplets, eating away at anything it touched. Kale and his team stepped out into this nightmare, their boots sinking slightly into the mud-cracked ground. Ahead lay miles of dense jungle, teeming with unseen dangers. Behind them, the safety of their outpost faded into the haze. Kale led the way, his rifle slung across his shoulder and a machete in hand. Cutting through Verthra's undergrowth wasn't easy. Thick vines coiled around tree trunks like serpents, while razor-sharp leaves sliced at exposed skin. Mira followed close behind, scanning the surroundings with her handheld scanner. Her eyes darted nervously from one shadow to the next. "Keep moving," she urged softly. "If we stop too long, the predators will find us." Rin brought up the rear, adjusting the straps of his backpack as he muttered to himself. Inside were tools, weapons, and supplies, everything they might need to survive. But even Rin knew no amount of tech could guarantee their safety here. He glanced over his shoulder occasionally, half expecting something monstrous to burst out of the foliage. So far, nothing had. Yet, hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the sounds of snapping branches and distant thunder. Then, without warning, the jungle fell quiet. Too quiet. Even the insects seemed to vanish, leaving an eerie stillness that set everyone on edge. "Something's wrong," Tessa said suddenly, stopping mid-step. She crouched low, inspecting the ground. Paw-like prints marred the soft earth, each one larger than her hand. "Skoraths," she whispered. "They're tracking us." Before anyone could react, a low growl rumbled through the trees. It was deep and guttural, vibrating in their chests. Mira froze, her face pale. "There," she hissed, pointing toward a cluster of bushes. A pair of glowing yellow eyes stared back, unblinking. Kale raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the creature lunged. A Skorath emerged from the shadows, a hulking beast with armored scales, rows of serrated teeth, and claws sharp enough to tear through steel. Its roar shook the air as it charged straight for them. "Move," Kale shouted, diving to the side. The others scattered just in time, narrowly avoiding the monster's strike. Ren fumbled with his improvised weapon, cursing under his breath. Sparks flew as he activated the device, sending arcs of electricity crackling into the air. With a wild yell, he jabbed it forward, striking the Skorath squarely in the chest. The creature convulsed, screeching in pain, but didn't fall. Instead, it turned its fury on Rin. Mira screamed as the beast swiped at him, forcing him to stumble backward. Before it could pounce again, Tessa sprang into action. She hurled a smoke grenade at its feet, enveloping the area in thick gray clouds. Blinded, the Skorath thrashed wildly, giving Kale the opening he needed. He fired 3 precise shots, each bullet finding its mark. The creature collapsed with a final, guttural snarl. Panting, the team regrouped, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt. "Everyone okay?" Kale asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Fine," Rin grumbled, brushing ash off his jacket. "But I'm starting to think rescue mission might have been code for suicide run." Tessa ignored him, staring at the fallen Skorath. "That was just one," she said grimly. "There'll be more." Kale nodded, reloading his rifle. "Let's keep moving. We don't have time to waste." As they pressed onward, none of them noticed the faint glow of surveillance drones hovering high above the canopy. Watching. Recording. The GRN wanted updates, but what they saw instead was chaos and courage. For the first time, someone on the other end of the feed whispered, "Maybe we underestimated them." The jungle seemed to close in around them as Kale and his team trudged deeper into Verthra's heart. The oppressive heat, combined with the constant threat of predators, weighed heavily on their shoulders. Every step felt like a gamble, every rustle of leaves a potential ambush. But despite the exhaustion gnawing at their bodies, there was no time to rest, not when lives hung in the balance. Finally, after hours of navigating treacherous terrain, they reached the crash site, or what was left of it. The wreckage sprawled across a clearing, half buried in mud and tangled vines. Twisted metal jutted out at odd angles, scorched and warped from the impact. Smoke still curled lazily into the air, mixing with the acrid scent of burnt circuitry. It was a grim sight, but what struck the team most was the eerie silence. No cries for help, no signs of movement, just devastation. "Spread out," Kale ordered, scanning the area with narrowed eyes. "Look for survivors." Mira moved cautiously toward the largest piece of debris, her scanner humming softly. She crouched beside a torn bulkhead, peering inside. What she found made her gasp. Huddled together were several figures, small, fragile-looking beings with translucent skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Their wide, luminous eyes blinked rapidly, darting between the humans with a mix of fear and confusion. "They're alive," Mira called out, her voice trembling with relief. "But they're scared. Really scared." Kale approached slowly, holding up his hands to signal he meant no harm. "We're here to help," he said carefully, though he doubted they understood him. Communication would be tricky without proper translation tools. He glanced back at Rin, who was already fiddling with his comm device. "Can you patch through to the Giarnan? See if they can send instructions." Before Rin could respond, one of the aliens, a taller figure with flowing tendrils instead of hair, stepped forward. Its movements were hesitant, almost apologetic. Then, in halting basic galactic, it spoke. "Help. Us." The words were barely audible, but they sent a shiver down Cal's spine. These creatures weren't just victims. They were intelligent and desperate. But things quickly spiraled out of control. As Mira tried to guide the aliens towards safer ground, panic erupted. One of the smaller ones, a child, misinterpreted her gestures and bolted in the opposite direction, straight toward a nearby swamp filled with bubbling toxic sludge. 2 others followed, their instincts overriding reason. Within moments, all 3 were waist-deep in the hazardous liquid, flailing wildly. "Damn it," Kale cursed, sprinting toward the edge of the swamp. Tessa was already ahead of him, leaping onto a fallen log to get closer. Without hesitation, she dove in, grabbing the first child and hauling it back to solid ground. The other 2 struggled against the thick muck, their shimmering forms flickering weakly as the toxins sapped their strength. Ren tossed a rope into the water, yelling for the remaining children to grab hold. With Kale and Mira pulling from above, they managed to drag the last 2 out just in time. Exhausted and coughing violently, the aliens collapsed onto the muddy bank, their glow dimmed but still present. "What did we do wrong?" Mira asked, tears streaming down her face as she cradled one of the children. "Why didn't they listen?" "It's not our fault," Tessa muttered bitterly. She pointed at the wreckage, where fragments of poorly translated emergency manuals lay scattered. "Look at this garbage. Whoever prepped them for survival gave them useless advice. They thought the swamp was safe." Kale clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. This wasn't just incompetence, it was negligence. Someone had failed these creatures long before the crash. As he looked at the frightened faces staring back at him, he realized something else. The GRN hadn't sent them to rescue the Luminaries because they cared. They'd sent them because they wanted someone expendable to clean up the mess. "We'll fix this," Kale promised, kneeling beside the tallest alien. His voice was firm, unwavering. "Whatever it takes, we'll get you out of here." For the first time since their arrival, the aliens seemed to relax, just slightly. Trust wasn't earned easily, especially not on a death world. But maybe, just maybe, Kale and his team were starting to prove they deserved it. The rescue had been chaotic, but it was only the beginning. With the Luminaries safe, for now, the team faced a new challenge: keeping them alive. The swamp incident had left the aliens weakened, their bioluminescent glow dimmer than before. Kale knew they couldn't afford another mistake. Not on Verthra, where every misstep could mean death. Mira knelt beside one of the children, her hands trembling as she examined its translucent skin. "Their biology is so fragile," she murmured, frustration evident in her voice. "Even the air here might be toxic to them. We need shelter, somewhere safer than this clearing." Kale nodded, scanning the wreckage for anything useful. Pieces of the alien ship lay scattered around them, some still intact enough to scavenge. "Rin," he called out, "start looking through the debris. See if you can find anything that works. Weapons, medical supplies, anything." Rin didn't need to be told twice. He dove into the task with his usual reckless enthusiasm, tossing aside useless scraps until he found something promising. A small device covered in glowing runes. It hummed faintly when he touched it, and the luminaries visibly perked up at the sound. One of the adults gestured toward it urgently, speaking in soft, melodic tones. "What's this thing?" Rin asked, holding it up for Mira to inspect. "It's part of their communication system," Mira guessed after studying it briefly. "Maybe even a distress beacon. If we can repair it, we might be able to call for backup." "Backup?" Tessa scoffed, leaning against a tree nearby. "You really think the GRN will send help, after what we've seen?" Kale shot her a warning glance. Now wasn't the time to dwell on betrayal. They needed solutions, not bitterness. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," he said firmly. "For now, let's focus on staying alive." As night fell, the jungle came alive with sounds, growls, hisses, and distant howls. The team set up a makeshift camp near the wreckage, using whatever materials they could salvage to create barriers against predators. But even with their defenses in place, no one slept soundly. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sent hearts racing. It was during one of these tense moments that the luminaries surprised them. The tallest alien, the one who had spoken basic galactic earlier, approached Cal cautiously. Its movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. In its hands, it held a glowing orb, pulsing softly with light. When it extended the orb toward him, Cal hesitated, unsure what to do. "They're offering us something," Mira whispered, watching intently. "I think it's a gift." Kale reached out slowly, taking the orb. As soon as his fingers brushed its surface, warmth spread through his palm, and the orb flared brightly. The jungle around them seemed to pause, the predator's growls fading into silence. Even the storm clouds above thinned slightly, allowing moonlight to filter through. "What just happened?" Rin asked, staring wide-eyed at the orb. "I don't know," Mira admitted, equally awestruck. "But I think it's protecting us. Their bioluminescence must repel predators somehow." Tessa frowned, pacing restlessly. "Great, so now we owe them our lives too." "No," Cal corrected, his tone firm. "They trusted us enough to share this. That makes us allies, not debtors." Over the next few hours, the team worked alongside the luminaries, combining human ingenuity with alien technology. Rin modified the orb's energy output to extend its protective radius, while Mira helped the luminaries identify edible plants growing nearby. For the first time since landing on Verthra, the group felt like they weren't fighting alone. But trust wasn't built overnight. As Kel watched the luminaries huddle together under the orb's glow, he couldn't shake the feeling that their alliance was fragile, and that danger loomed closer than ever. The uneasy peace brought by the luminaries' glowing orb didn't last long. Just as the team began to settle into their new rhythm, the sky above them darkened, not with storm clouds, but with the ominous hum of engines. A sleek GRN dropship descended through the canopy, its landing thrusters kicking up torrents of dirt and debris. The sudden arrival sent a ripple of tension through both humans and aliens alike. Kale stepped forward, shielding his eyes from the glare as the ship touched down. The ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, revealing Commander Lyra Voss flanked by armed GRN soldiers. Her expression was stern, her posture rigid. She scanned the scene quickly, her gaze lingering on the weakened Luminaris before finally meeting Cal's. "Captain Draven," she said, her voice clipped. "You've done well to keep them alive." "Well enough," Cal replied coolly, crossing his arms. "But we're still waiting for that backup you promised." Lyra ignored the jab, striding toward the group with purpose. Her boots crunched against the muddy ground as she stopped just short of Cal. "We're here now," she said simply. "Stand aside. Let us handle the situation." Tessa stepped forward, her hand resting on the hilt of her knife. "Handle it how?" she demanded, her tone sharp. "By leaving them to die again." Lyra's jaw tightened, but she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she gestured for her troops to move in. "Our priority is securing the Luminaris and transporting them to safety. You've done your part. Now step back." Cal planted his feet firmly, refusing to budge. "Not until you explain why they were stranded in the first place." "Someone sabotaged their ship, Commander. We found evidence in the wreckage." The accusation hung heavy in the air. For a moment, Lyra looked genuinely surprised. But only for a moment. Then her mask slipped back into place, cold and unreadable. "That's classified information," she said flatly. "Your job is over. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Rin exchanged a glance with Mira, who clutched the glowing orb protectively. The Luminaries had gathered behind them, their shimmering forms flickering anxiously. They trusted the Deathworlders now. And they clearly didn't trust the GRN. "They're not going anywhere with you," Tessa snapped, stepping between the soldiers and the aliens. Her stance was defiant, unyielding. "Not unless you tell us the truth." Lyra sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose as if dealing with unruly children. "Fine," she said after a pause. "If you must know, the sabotage wasn't sanctioned by the GRN. It was an internal matter. Certain factions wanted to exploit the Luminaris technology. But that's none of your concern." "None of our concern," Cal repeated incredulously. "You dragged us into this mess, put lives at risk, and now you expect us to walk away. Like hell, we will." Before tensions could escalate further, one of the GRN soldiers raised his weapon, aiming it directly at Cal. "Stand down," he ordered, "or we'll take them by force." In response, Tessa drew her knife with lightning speed, pressing it against the soldier's throat before anyone could react. "Try it," she growled, her voice low and dangerous. "See what happens." Chaos erupted. More soldiers moved in, weapons drawn, while Rin activated his modified taser device, sparks crackling menacingly. Mira held the glowing orb aloft, its light pulsing brighter as if responding to the conflict. Even the Luminaris joined the standoff, their bioluminescence flaring in warning. Cal raised a hand, trying to defuse the situation before it turned deadly. "Enough," he shouted. Turning to Lyra, he added, "You want the Luminaris. Earn their trust, or leave empty-handed." For a heartbeat, it seemed like Lyra might order her troops to attack. But then she hesitated, glancing at the frightened aliens behind Cal. Whatever she saw there made her reconsider. With visible reluctance, she signaled her team to stand down. "This isn't over," Lyra warned, her voice icy. "You've made powerful enemies today." As the dropship lifted off, disappearing into the stormy skies, Cal let out a shaky breath. Victory felt hollow. They'd won the battle. But the war was far from over. The departure of the GRN dropship left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth. The jungle, momentarily quiet during the standoff, resumed its unnerving symphony of growls and rustles. Cal stood at the edge of their makeshift camp, staring into the distance where the ship had vanished. His mind raced with questions. What would the GRN do next? Would they send reinforcements, or worse, mercenaries? One thing was certain, staying put wasn't an option. "We need to move," Cal announced, turning back to face his team. "If they come back, and they will, we can't let them find us here." Mira nodded grimly, clutching the glowing orb that had become both a lifeline and a symbol of fragile trust. "But where do we go?" she asked. "Every direction is dangerous." Tessa stepped forward, her knife still in hand. "There's an old GRN outpost deeper inland," she said, "abandoned years ago when they decided Verthra wasn't worth the trouble. If we can reach it, we might be able to use their equipment to broadcast what we know, to expose the corruption." Cale considered this for a moment. It was risky. The journey would take them through some of Verthra's most treacherous regions, but staying hidden wasn't enough. They needed leverage if they were going to protect the Luminaris. "All right," he said finally. "We head for the outpost. Let's move before nightfall." The group packed up quickly, each member carrying as much gear as they could manage. The Luminaris followed closely, their movements cautious but trusting. Rin muttered under his breath about how ridiculous it was to lug around so much junk while dodging predators, but no one paid him much attention. Survival came first. Their path led them into a volcanic zone, a desolate expanse of jagged black rock and rivers of molten lava. The heat was unbearable, radiating off the ground in waves that made breathing feel like swallowing fire. Mira kept glancing nervously at the Luminaris, whose shimmering forms seemed even dimmer in the oppressive environment. "They're struggling," she whispered to Cale. "This place, it's killing them." "We don't have a choice," Cale replied quietly. "If we slow down, we die." As if on cue, the earth trembled beneath their feet. A distant rumble grew louder, shaking loose rocks from the cliffs above. "Eruption," Tessa shouted, pointing toward a towering volcano spewing ash and flames. Thick clouds of toxic smoke billowed into the sky, blotting out the sun. "Run," Cale barked, ushering the group toward a narrow canyon that offered some semblance of shelter. The Luminaris moved as fast as their weakened bodies allowed, their soft cries echoing eerily against the stone walls. Behind them, the eruption intensified, sending waves of superheated air rolling across the landscape. Just as they reached the relative safety of the canyon, disaster struck. A massive chunk of flaming debris crashed down, blocking their path. Panic surged among the Luminaris, their bioluminescence flickering wildly. Rin cursed, frantically scanning for another way through. "Dead end," he yelled over the roar of the eruption. Cale clenched his fists, adrenaline coursing through him. He turned to Tessa. "Can you clear it?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not without explosives. And even then, it'll bring the whole damn cliff down on us." Thinking quickly, Mira raised the glowing orb, its light pulsing erratically. To everyone's astonishment, the Luminaris began to mimic the rhythm, their own glow sensing with the orbs. Slowly, a faint barrier formed around the group, deflecting the worst of the falling ash and heat. "It's working," Mira exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. "They're protecting us." The moment was short-lived. Acid rain began pouring down, sizzling as it hit the rocky ground. The barrier held, for now, but it wouldn't last forever. Cale glanced at the blocked exit, then at the perilous route ahead. There was only one choice. "Rin, blast a hole in the rubble," he ordered. "Everyone else, hold tight." With a nod, Rin activated his modified taser device, channeling its energy into a concentrated beam. Sparks flew as he carved a narrow opening in the debris, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. One by one, they scrambled out, the Luminaris guided gently by Mira and Tessa. By the time they emerged into open terrain, exhaustion weighed heavily on all of them. But they couldn't stop. Not yet. In the distance, the outline of the abandoned GRN outpost loomed like a beacon of hope. Or perhaps a trap. The abandoned GRN outpost was a crumbling relic of humanity's hubris, its skeletal structure rising out of the toxic swamps like a ghost ship stranded on land. The walls were scorched and pitted, windows shattered, and vines had begun to reclaim the building as their own. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, and more importantly, It held the tools they needed to fight back. Kale led the group cautiously through the entrance, his rifle raised and ready. Inside, the air smelled stale and metallic, a mix of rust and decay that clung to the back of their throats. Dust covered every surface, and debris littered the floors, remnants of a hasty evacuation years ago. Mira coughed softly, waving away clouds of particles kicked up by their boots. "This place is a death trap waiting to happen," Tessa muttered, scanning the shadows with sharp eyes. "If the jungle doesn't kill us, this dump might." "Better than nothing," Kale replied grimly. "Spread out. Look for anything useful, comms systems, power cores, weapons, anything we can use." Rin immediately gravitated toward a console near what looked like the main control room. His fingers danced over the cracked panel, sparks flying as he worked. "This stuff is ancient," he grumbled, pulling out wires and rerouting connections. "But I think I can get it running again. Maybe." Mira guided the Luminaris to a corner of the room where the glowing orb could provide some protection. Their shimmering forms flickered weakly, their energy visibly drained after days of constant danger. She knelt beside them, speaking softly in basic galactic mixed with soothing tones. One of the children reached out a trembling hand, touching her arm gently. For the first time since meeting them, Mira smiled, a small, fragile thing, but genuine. Tessa prowled the perimeter, checking for structural weaknesses or hidden threats. When she returned, her expression was grim. "There are signs of recent activity here," she said, holding up a discarded ration pack wrapper stamped with the GRN logo. "Someone's been using this place as a base." Kale frowned, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Not the GRN," he said. "They wouldn't leave trash behind, not unless they wanted us to find it." "Black market slavers," Tessa guessed darkly. "Word travels fast out here. If someone knows about the Luminaris, they'll come looking." Before anyone could respond, Rin let out a triumphant shout. "Got it," he exclaimed, standing up from the console. A faint hum filled the room as lights flickered to life, casting eerie shadows across the walls. "Power's online. Now let's see if we can patch into the galactic network." While Rin worked, Kale turned his attention to the Luminaris. They watched him intently, their luminous eyes reflecting both fear and trust. He crouched down, holding up the glowing orb. "We're going to tell everyone what happened to you," he promised. "No one will be able to ignore the truth once we broadcast it." As Rin tapped furiously at the console, static crackled over the speakers. Then, slowly, images began to appear, a live feed connecting them to thousands of systems across the galaxy. News outlets, government channels, private feeds, all tuned in simultaneously. This was their moment. "Listen carefully," Kale began, stepping into view of the camera. His voice was steady, commanding. "What you're about to hear isn't speculation, it's fact. The GRN betrayed these beings, the Luminaris, leaving them to die on Verthra so corrupt factions could exploit their technology. We have proof. And now, the galaxy will know the truth." Behind him, the Luminaris stood tall, their glow brightening as if fueled by resolve. The image of their frail yet resilient forms resonated deeply, a stark contrast to the polished lies of the GRN. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then came the response. Outrage, disbelief, calls for accountability. Across planets and colonies, people demanded answers. The GRN's facade began to crumble. But amidst the triumph, Tessa noticed something else, a blinking red light on the console. Guys," she said, pointing to it. "I think we've got company." Through the monitors, they saw movement outside. Dozens of figures approaching the outpost, armed to the teeth. Slavers. They hadn't come alone. Kale met Tessa's gaze, determination hardening his features. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," he said. "Let's finish what we started." The slavers moved like shadows under the dim light of Verthra's toxic sky, their weapons gleaming with menace. They surrounded the outpost, cutting off any chance of escape. Kale and his team stood at the windows, watching as the enemy forces closed in. Tessa clenched her fists, her jaw tight. "They're not here to negotiate," she muttered, her voice low and dangerous. "No kidding," Rin replied, adjusting the makeshift taser weapon strapped to his belt. Sparks crackled faintly as he tested it. "But if they want a fight, we'll give them one." Kale scanned the room, taking stock of their resources. Ammo was limited, and while Rin's gadgets were clever, they wouldn't hold up against an entire squad of heavily armed mercenaries. Still, surrender wasn't an option, not when the Luminaris depended on them. He turned to Mira, who was crouched beside the glowing orb, shielding the aliens behind her. "Keep them safe," he said firmly. "No matter what happens, protect them." Mira nodded, though fear flickered in her eyes. She held the orb close, its pulsing light steady and reassuring. The Luminaris huddled together, their own bioluminescence dim but resilient. For all their fragility, they radiated a quiet strength, a reminder of why this fight mattered. As the first wave of slavers breached the entrance, Kale gave the order. "Now." Rin pressed a button on his console, triggering a series of traps he'd rigged during their brief respite. Explosions rocked the building, sending debris flying and forcing the attackers to retreat momentarily. The diversion gave the team precious seconds to regroup and fortify their position. Tessa took point, firing precise shots from her rifle as she darted between cover points. Her aim was deadly accurate, each bullet finding its mark. Behind her, Kale directed the others, using overturned furniture and fallen beams to create barricades. Even Mira joined the fray, hurling acid-resistant grenades that Rin had salvaged earlier. The concoction sizzled where it landed, eating through armor and flesh alike. Despite their efforts, the slavers kept coming. Their numbers seemed endless, their determination fueled by greed. One particularly large mercenary broke through the defenses, charging straight for the Luminaris. Before anyone could react, Tessa intercepted him, tackling him to the ground with brutal efficiency. A swift strike to the throat silenced him permanently. "We can't keep this up forever," Rin shouted, dodging a spray of gunfire. His goggles fogged up from sweat, but his hands remained steady as he activated another device, a flashbang that blinded the advancing enemies. "We don't have to," Kale replied, spotting an opening. Through the chaos, he noticed something. The slavers' leader, a towering figure clad in black armor, issuing commands from a distance. If they could take him out, the rest might falter. "Cover me," Kale ordered, grabbing a smoke grenade from his pack. As the thick gray cloud filled the room, he slipped past the distracted mercenaries, moving silently toward their leader. Every step felt like walking a razor's edge, but adrenaline pushed him forward. When he reached the target, Kale didn't hesitate. He lunged, tackling the armored figure to the ground. The two struggled fiercely, but Kale's survival instincts kicked in. With a final burst of strength, he disarmed the leader and delivered a decisive blow, knocking him unconscious. Without their commander, the remaining slavers began to scatter. Some fled into the jungle, while others surrendered, dropping their weapons. The battle was over, but the cost weighed heavily on everyone. As the dust settled, Kale returned to the others, bloody but alive. The Luminaris approached him, their glow brighter than before. One of them, the tallest, placed a hand on his shoulder, their touch warm and grateful. It was a gesture of unity, of shared victory. "We did it," Mira whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We actually did it." Kale nodded, looking around at his battered but unbroken team. "Yeah," he said quietly, "but this is just the beginning." The aftermath of the battle left the outpost in ruins, its walls scorched and floors littered with debris. But despite the destruction, there was a sense of triumph in the air, a fragile yet undeniable hope that had been forged through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Kale stood at the edge of the clearing outside, watching as the first rays of sunlight pierced through Verthra's perpetually stormy skies. It wasn't much, but it felt like a new beginning. Inside, Mira tended to the luminaries, her hand steady as she applied salves made from the few medicinal plants they'd managed to scavenge. Their shimmering forms were brighter now, their energy slowly returning after days of fear and exhaustion. One of the children reached out to touch her face, its small hand glowing faintly. Mira smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're safe now," she whispered. "We'll make sure of it." Tessa leaned against a broken wall, cleaning her rifle with methodical precision. Her expression was unreadable, but Cale knew her well enough to see the weight she carried. She caught his gaze and nodded toward the horizon. "What happens next?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Cale exhaled deeply, crossing his arms as he considered the question. "We tell the galaxy what happened here, not just about the GRN's corruption, but about us, about how survivors can rise above being forgotten and become something more." Rin, ever the optimist despite everything, grinned as he tinkered with one of the comm devices. "Yeah, maybe we'll even get some respect for once. You know, instead of being treated like expendable trash." "Respect isn't given," Tessa said sharply, though without malice. "It's earned, and if we want to keep earning it, we need to stay vigilant." Cale agreed. The GRN's corruption ran deep, and exposing it would only be the first step. Already, reports were flooding in across galactic networks. Protests erupted on multiple planets, demanding accountability and reform. The Deathworlders broadcast had ignited a firestorm of outrage, forcing the GRN to issue public apologies and launch internal investigations. But Cale knew better than to trust empty promises. Real change would take time, and vigilance. As the days passed, the team worked tirelessly to repair the outpost, turning it into a sanctuary not just for themselves, but for others like them. Marginalized species, overlooked colonies, and forgotten outposts began reaching out, inspired by the Deathworlders' actions. Together, they formed an alliance, a coalition of the overlooked and underestimated, united by a shared purpose: survival, justice, and mutual protection. One evening, as the team gathered around a makeshift fire, the luminaries joined them, their glow casting soft light over the group. They didn't speak basic galactic fluently, but their presence spoke volumes. Trust had been built, bonds forged in the crucible of adversity. Cale looked at each member of his team, pride swelling in his chest. They weren't heroes. They never claimed to be, but they had proven that even those cast aside could stand tall when it mattered most. "We started this because we had no choice," he said, his voice firm yet warm. "But now we have a chance to build something better, something that lasts." Mira nodded, clutching the glowing orb tightly. "For the first time, I feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves." Tessa smirked, leaning back with her arms crossed. "Just don't expect me to start singing campfire songs or anything." Rin laughed, tossing a piece of scrap metal into the flames. "Too late. I've already got one in mind." As the fire crackled and the stars peeked through gaps in the clouds, Cale allowed himself a rare moment of peace. Verthra was still a death world, harsh and unforgiving. But within its chaos, they had found purpose, and perhaps a legacy worth fighting for. In the distance, the jungle stirred, alive with both danger and possibility. The Deathworlders were ready for whatever came next. After all, surviving wasn't just about enduring. It was about choosing who you wanted to be when the world tried to break you. And they had chosen well.